Well, as many of you know, we were on vacation the last few days. We went out west and we saw a number of things. That went to a number of national parks, and we were a week ago yesterday. We were in Death Valley at the lowest point in North America at 122 degrees, and it was just kind of like a blow dryer blowing in your face as we walked across that area. Last Thursday, we were getting ready. We were headed back to Las Vegas to catch our flight on Friday. And as I checked the weather, and Las Vegas said that it was 109 degrees, but it felt like 104 degrees. So I thought, well, I wonder what it's like in Monticello. So I punched in Monticello, and it was 94 degrees here, but it felt like 109. So, there's lots of heat everywhere. We went to a number of national parks, and we walked a lot of trails. I don't know how many of you enjoy doing trails, but when I walk trails in national parks or anywhere, I like to stick with the trail. Make sure that I'm on the right numbered path so that it gets back to where I started. But now there are those who like to kind of wander off the beaten path, and like to kind of make their own trails. Now, nowadays, it might be good to have a GPS along with you, although our GPS sometimes struggles to find a signal. And so, when you don't necessarily have a GPS and you're not sure which direction you're going out in the wilderness, it's good to have a compass. Now, that's what I've got here in my hand. I don't know if you can tell that. Now, Pastor Alex, you're an Eagle Scout, is that right?
That's correct.
So, what can you tell me about this compass?
It looks cool. Well, it has never eat soggy waffles, northeast, southwest.
Okay.
See? I remember some things from Scouts. But it always seems to face north, right? If I'm like this, then the little gadget will be facing one certain direction at all times? Something like that?
Okay, so it's always pointing. The needle is always pointing to magnetic north.
I remember a few times in Scouts where we had to go and use one of these things, and somehow I got a merit badge, but I don't know if I'd get that today. But anyway, yeah.
So did it bring you out of the woods or wherever you were at?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm here today, so Scouts would have been a lot easier with a GPS, I think.
Yeah, but Scouts need to depend on the compass and magnetic north. Today, as we're talking about being centered on Christ, if we think about Christ as being our magnetic north, is the place that we need to be centered. Whatever twists and turns may come in our life, no matter what temptations may come our way, no matter what the obstructions may be in our life, we need to make sure that we stay focused upon Christ, because He'll keep us headed in the right direction.
Our scripture lesson today is found in Colossians. And this scripture lesson is really interesting, I think, because it talks about us being in union with God. And it's actually something that's being written in a time where it's saying, Paul is saying, hey, I want you to be a better follower of Christ. I want you to realize what's being worked on in your life. And then I want you to understand that you are no longer solo, or you're no longer lonely. You are actually going to be in union with God, in union with Christ. And so I want to read the scripture to you. I'm going to read you the first two verses. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. And I like how it starts off in the first verse. It just says, since then you have been raised. Since then you have been raised with Christ. You are new. You are a new being. You are something that has once been down, and now you have been raised. You are up. And that's a beautiful picture that we can think, because there are plenty of times where we have been down. That we have been in the pits, and we've been in the what's that along the road there? What are those called? Ditches.
Ditches, yeah.
Yes. We've been in the ditch. But we see here this imagery of being raised up with Christ. And that's good, and that's great. And so then it moves on, and it talks about this language of having, you're set on things above. Things above. And a lot of times when we hear that things above, we can get like all like pearly gates, and we can get all, like the streets of gold and that kind of imagery. But in essence, what we're saying here is that things above would be those things that Christ has taught us, those values, those practical things that He did in His ministry that will help you be a stronger follower of Christ. Those things that He talked about in the Sermon on the Mount that Brian mentioned earlier. Those things like, loving your enemy, loving your neighbor, worshiping God. Those things that are set above. And so then there's two things that he talks about that you need to have focused on setting above. And those two things are, the first one being your heart. Your heart needs to be set above. And of course this is our heart. We've learned that in school, Pledge of Allegiance, put your hand over your heart and all that. But the imagery that a lot of times when these writers wrote was that heart was everything, was what made you tick. Those things that made you ambitious, those things that made you passionate about things. It was your entire being. It was your entire being and everything that you were. And so your heart needs to be on something set above, on the things set above, which would be that idea of God's teachings, that God is the focus. So you have this imagery of your heart, your whole being needing to be set on Christ. Not just set on Christ, but set on Christ's way of living. Set on His values. Set on those things that you need to live out in your life. And then it goes on and it says that you need to then set your minds on things above. You need to set your minds on things above. And something that I love about the United Methodist Church is that the United Methodist Church really strives to live this out. Really strives to say, as a denomination, we are going to have our head and our heart work together. We're not just going to have our head work, and we're not just going to have our heart work, or we're not going to have them work in separate categories, but they're going to work together. And so do we, as followers of Christ. We need to have our heads and our hearts work together. And that idea of setting our heads on the things above means that we need to think things out. We can't just talk about heaven, but we need to think about heaven as well. We need to think about what it means to be that follower of Christ. We need to use our minds so that our inner dispositions will be then focused on Christ. Will we not just jump off the ledge of something and be passionate about it, but will we also think it out so we can think of the conclusion and how it's going to look at the end? And so this is a powerful statement. If we are focusing our lives on Christ, if we are saying that we want to be centered on Christ, two things that we need to do is make sure that our hearts and our minds are set on Christ's teachings above.
As we go on in the passage and look in verse 3, Paul says, your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Now, just as in your hand, let's say you put a rose petal, and you would gently put your hand around that rose petal to protect it. It would be hidden, but it would also be protected. It would be in a secure place. Paul talks about our life being hidden with Christ in God. When I pray with someone in the hospital or maybe someone who's going through a difficult time, I often pray that God would hold them in the hollow of His hand. That place of being held in the hollow of God's hand being a place of security, being a place of protection. Can you think of any better place to be than with Christ in God? When facing adversity, when facing times of trouble, when facing challenges, can you think of a better place to be than with Christ in God?